As I rode out one bright May morning to view the meadows and flowers gay, whom should I spy but my own true lover, as she sat under yon willow tree. I took off my hat and I did salute her. I did salute her most courageously.
Thank you so much to the Dingle Literary Festival for having me. It's such a pity that we both can't be there in Dingle for the event. It's been such a strange year. We make do. I was there last year for Other Voices, and it's such a special place. I'm sure we'll both get back there soon. I'm very excited for the conversation today with Noelle Brown. Thanks for joining me, and thanks to everyone listening. So I'll just do a few short introductions and then we'll get into the conversation. So I'm Caelainn Hogan. I'm the author of Republic of Shame, which came out in paperback this year. And it's about the ongoing legacy of the religious run institutions in Ireland, particularly the mother and baby institutions. And, you know, I'm from Dublin. Before the book, I was working as a freelance journalist. I was doing assignments in Syria for the New York Times Magazine and National Geographic. But I grew up in Ireland, you know, I'm from Ireland, and this was something that I knew about. You know, we grew up knowing about the Magdalen laundries and the mother and baby homes, but it was something that I never realized affected people I knew, that it was something that was so recent, really, and was an ongoing legacy affecting countless people's lives. And as I started to speak to people who experience these institutions firsthand, I realized this ongoing culture of secrecy that was affecting people. And again, how recently. So one of the institutions that I ended up speaking to someone about in Donegal operated until 2006, which really shocked me. You know, I think I was around 17 that year, and this was something that could have affected my life and has affected the lives of people my own age and younger. So writing the book was really an experience of understanding how big an impact this system of institutions has had and continues to have in this country. So I'm really pleased to have Noelle here to speak about it. Noelle was born in Bessborough, an institution in Cork, and she is a campaigner for adoption rights and speaks very powerfully about how, you know, this is an equality issue and this is something that we really need to reckon with today. Noelle has spent the last 32 years working as a performer, writer, theatre maker and director. She is also a campaigner for adoption rights and is asking for the Irish state to exhume the mass graves at the former mother and baby institutions throughout Ireland. So thanks again, Noelle. I wanted to start speaking with you. It's something we've talked a bit about before, is your experience of writing your play Postscript, which I think first came out with the Dublin Fringe in 2013, was performed at the Abbey as well in 2017. and is about, you know, your own experience as an adopted person searching for answers. And I know it was something that you kind of struggled with, that it was something you really didn't want to write something autobiographical or something that was nonfiction. But the process, you know, speak to us a bit about what that process was like, exploring your own experience through writing that play.
Sure. Well, as you said, it was written in 2013. Myself and my friend Michelle Forbes decided to get together and write something. It was the fashion at the time that actors were creating their own work, and a lot of them were personal stories. But I didn't go into a room with Michelle to do that. I was adamant I didn't want to do anything like that. I had an idea around the lost art of letter writing was what I wanted to write about. But the story kept coming up. The adoption was in the room all the time. And another friend of ours, Louisa Carroll, was in the room at the time as a third pair of eyes while we were devising. And she kept saying, you have to write that story. And I was going, no, I'm not standing on stage talking about my life. It's too personal. And she kept on at me and on at me. And then one day she rang me and said, look, we can spend another 2 weeks trying to create something, or you can sit down and write a letter to your birth mother. So I did, reluctantly. And that began the play, basically. We took off from there, and Michelle and I divided up the writing, but the story emerged. I freaked out about halfway through the process because I had come from a background of traditional theatre as an actor and was used to having a character and, you know, somebody else's words and everything else. And suddenly I was faced with my own deeply personal story, and I would be standing on stage as myself telling my story. So I suggested tentatively, maybe we'll, you know, create a character. We'll put it in somebody else, my story, but give her a name or something. And we tried that, and it just went flat. And they kept saying, well, you can't. I mean, you can do it, but this story won't work unless it's you talking. And it was a absolutely terrifying experience. And I've had nerves before as an actor, but it was absolutely terrifying. But they were right. And I didn't know in 2013 what we had written. I thought, great, we've got work. This is brilliant. We've created a story. You know, it's beautifully written. It brings contemporary theatre and traditional theatre together, styles-wise. And then I remember walking out after the first night and just seeing people from the industry that I respect and admire standing there and just crying. They were so moved and so emotional. And I was suddenly going, oh my God. And then another few nights after that, as the Fringe Festival went on, I'd walk out and I'd see survivors there and I'd see people who were affected by the issue. And it's only then I realized what we'd actually done. And that play has been going since 2013, right up until 2020. We performed it in London in February in the London Irish Centre. 2 incredible nights. Again, the second night audience was packed with survivors who were deeply moved by it at the post-show discussion afterwards. So we've been on a hell of a journey with it. We've done all of Ireland. We've been to Paris, we've been to London, we've been in the Abbey. And every time it seems the nation has woken up a little bit more every time we do it. You know, it's extraordinary. The last time in the Abbey, primarily the audience had been older people. In the Abbey, it was young people who came to see it. And many of them were the children of women who were born in mother and baby homes. And they were very angry and very emotional. So it's been quite a journey. And it's a play I'm very, very proud of. I wish it wasn't still relevant. I wish that something had changed, that this was no longer an issue, but it is. In 2020, it's still a big issue.
That process of letter writing, I mean, it's so rare that we actually write letters to anyone these days, but it's something, speaking with survivors, I ended up seeing a lot of this, a lot of letters back and forth as sort of reunions were taking place or as people were connecting after many years. And writing the book, I really realized how difficult that search is for so many people. You know, I met a woman born the same year as me in 1988 who was only beginning to search for her mother, and the process of applying for records, you know, trying to get access, as you know, you've spoken about a lot, adopted people in Ireland don't have the right to their own birth information, their own name. So did speak with a lot of people born in the institutions who are trying to find out about their identity and trying to get information or trace their birth parents. And it's a really difficult process. Some are put on waiting lists for 2 to 3 years. And there's kind of this ongoing culture of secrecy that I think people are starting to realize with the Repeal the Seal campaign that just happened. I think there's a little more recognition of that, but it's something that when I was writing the book was not sort of commonly known, and so can you speak to us a little bit about your own experience of looking for answers, of trying to find out more information as an adopted person?
Sure. I mean, I was very naive when I started in 2002. I thought I could just pick up the phone or I could write a letter and get my information. But it took from 2002 until the end of last year, 2019, to come to the end of my story. It took all that time dealing with, lies, misinformation, delays. And finally, I went down the DNA route and ended my own story because I had been bounced around for so many years. And one particular deliberate lie that was take a decision made by a nun to lie about something finally came to fruition. And that was how I found my birth father in the end. But I'd been told that information didn't exist for a long, long time. And it was only after, my birth mother, unfortunately, had passed away nine years before I went tracing. She was one of the hepatitis C women and was given contaminated blood, so died at 47, which weirdly was the same age I was when I wrote the play. Something must have been happening creatively or something. It was very strange. But after a 13-minute interview on the Late Late Show, I was dealing with TUSLA at the time. They rang me and said, "Oh, we do have your father's name and address." I was stunned, but they wouldn't give it to me. Like everything else, they just wouldn't give it to me. They said, "We'll put you on a 2.5-year waiting list, after which time we will contact him on your behalf." And I had no faith in that, having been lied to and treated appallingly since 2002. So that's why I went down the DNA route and found him. But he'd passed away in 2016, unfortunately. So it has taken a large chunk of my life to access basic information, where I came from, my birth cert, medical records. I still don't have them. And I can't believe it's taken that long. I really can't. And I'm not alone. There's 100,000 of us, dealing with the same issues. And I think for a long time, people didn't know the extent of it. When I wrote Postscript, I had close friends come up to me and say, "I had no idea that you were not entitled to a birth cert. I didn't know that you had those difficulties." So I suppose the play in itself was a telling of my story, but also providing people with a lot of information around what it is to be an adopted person in Ireland, in modern day Ireland, where you are stigmatized and still paying for the fact that you happened to be born in a mother and baby home or any other of the institutions. You're still stigmatized. You are still unequal, really, in the eyes of the law. And laws are being broken to perpetrate that treatment of us. So it was, it's been a long battle and a long time, and I still can't believe it's taken me that long. Stuff that people take for granted. Anyone born in Ireland takes for granted: where you were born, what your name is, who your parents are, your medical history. Something I wanted to ask you, Caelainn, in relation to the book, because I never got a chance to ask you before, so this is a good opportunity. It's an extraordinary book, and it's so sensitively written and so forensically detailed in really telling people what is going on in the present day and also in the past. But what prompted you to write it? I've always wanted to ask you that. What was the starting point for you as a writer?
I mean, like I said, I was a freelance journalist. I was mainly focused on international stories, on Syria, stories of conflict and human rights. But I was at home in 2017 in Ireland, and that was the year that the results of the test excavation in Tuam were made public, that significant human remains were found buried in sewerage chambers on the grounds of the Bon Secours home in Tuam, which is, I think, Tuam was how many people came to first know about these institutions if they weren't directly impacted. And it was also this moment of real change in Ireland. You know, I think it was a few years after the marriage equality referendum when this really difficult conversation about who gets to be a family sort of raised its head again. I think the church used it as a way to try and oppose marriage equality, and it really backfired. You know, there was a real resistance to that, of being told who is and isn't a family and who gets the protections of a family, because, you know, as you know, so many women, so many mothers sent to these institutions were told, you know, you can't be a family, you shouldn't keep your child, you would be selfish to keep your child. And so I think that that conversation really brought again to the surface that painful history. And we were also looking ahead to the repeal referendum on abortion. And so a lot of silences were being broken at the time about how church and state had treated pregnant people in this country, and treated women for many, many years. So it just felt like this really important moment. And I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand how those institutions were normalized for so long. I had written before about direct provision, about the experiences of people in that system. And I feel like there are a lot of parallels in the way that we institutionalize vulnerable people. And so I really wanted to understand how that system had been normalized for so long, and not only the mother and baby homes, but the Magdalene laundries as well. And then as I sort of began to do a little research, I just realized how close to home it was. There was actually an institution around the corner from my house where thousands of children were adopted from, run by the Sisters of Charity, Temple Hill, St. Patrick's on Temple Hill. So it was right there. And I had walked past that building growing up and never knew what it was. And as I started to speak to people I knew, I found out that, again, friends, people my own age were affected. And it just, you know, it felt like a very urgent thing to write about. And, you know, finding out that people were going through these searches like you just described, which was just really, you know, just astounding to me that people were still denied this information. Going into the General Register office and going through ledgers with one young woman in her 30s. She only had her birth date, so we had to go through every single line of thousands of names in a ledger trying to find her exact birth date, and then the mother's name would match with the child's name because she was unmarried. So, you know, just this kind of Kafkaesque system that still existed and was being perpetuated in, you know, in my name, in our name. And as you know, there's laws, you know, being brought in that are still continuing, I think, this culture of secrecy. And then, you know, going to the commemorations, meeting survivors. We first, you know, I think we had met through the Irish Writers Centre, but I first heard you speak about your own experience at Bessborough, at a commemoration there that happens every year, both for survivors. You know, people come from all over the world, people who were sent to the States for adoption, you know, kind of for hefty donations that families gave. People come back for the commemorations, but also to remember the people, the many children that didn't survive. So in Bessborough, more than 900 children died. And they still don't know the burial location, like where more than 800 children are buried. And, you know, what was that experience like for you, going to those those commemorations and meeting survivors and hearing about sort of the experiences of people who'd been born in the same institution?
I think that was the second time I'd been there. I'd gone, I think, the previous year or the year before. And it was hugely emotional because I hadn't been back there for 50 years. So walking up that driveway and seeing the window where my birth mother had seen me being driven off and stuff, it was a weird experience. And I'd grown up nearby and stuff as well. So I didn't, until I went tracing, I didn't know that I was actually born in Bessborough. If you were born in Cork, you were told you're born in Dublin, and that's on my passport. It's on my short form birth cert. So it was only then I realized, my God, I actually, you know, was born in Bessborough. But it was, I remember the day I met you, just on the driveway, and you were writing the book at the time. But it was strange. And it was also the first time that I'd met the mothers of those babies that are missing, that died in Bessborough, that they haven't been found. They're in a mass grave, presumably in the grounds of Bessborough. And I was really affected by it. I also met people who had been the subject of vaccine trials when they were in Bessborough without the mother's consent when they were infants. That was something I tried to find out myself, whether I had been the subject of vaccine trials or food supplement trials was the other one. And it was a revelation for me. It was hugely emotional to be back there as an adult, but also meeting those women. Anne O'Gorman was the first person that walked up to me, and her face, and she told me about her baby that she's still looking for 40, 50 years later. And it was just horrific. I thought I knew this place was bad, but I didn't realize how bad. I mean, it was a real wake-up call for me. And also that sense of, I started to identify as a survivor of a mother and baby home. I think it started when the day the Tuam story broke. I wasn't just born in a mother and baby home. I survived a mother and baby home, particularly in relation to Bessborough and horrors that have come out of there. And that's, people say, why do you call yourself a survivor? Because I may not have survived in that place, because it was, common practice to neglect children and not look after them, because we were othered. We were, seen as something lesser. So therefore, that we lived or died, people didn't seem to care. But I remember that day very, very clearly, just chatting to you and then meeting you afterwards about the book and stuff. But I was delighted you were writing the book as well,
And that was something, finding out that mothers were still searching for where their own children were buried was something that just, it really hit me.
From finding their children as well, redacted records, misinformation, disappeared records, it's kind of extraordinary in modern Ireland that we're still dealing with this. And, we have repeal, we've marriage equality, but there's this one big, massive chunk of our history that we refuse to acknowledge. Thankfully, people, are now supporting us in our fight, as we saw with the Repeal the Seal campaign. That level of support has made a difference, because I think I don't think there's a family in Ireland who isn't affected by adoption or doesn't know somebody who's adopted or had, what I mean? It's part of our culture. It was part of our history. And to deny it and just think, well, we'll just bury everything and hide everything and, not deal with adopted people's needs and birth mothers' needs for as long as we can until they pass away, deny, delay till we die scenario, which has been really enforced over the years. So I hope there's a change on the way, and certainly with the Repeal the Seal campaign and the public support we had was astounding. It really was, and it did a great service to us. We still have to fight, unfortunately, because our data, our information is still in the hands of TUSLA, who, though there are good people working in that organisation, it's a flawed organisation, and they're using GDPR in an illegal way to prevent us from getting our information. And the fact that they now have more of that information that they can cover in TIPEX, redact, whatever they need to do, is very worrying. So for us, the fight isn't over, sadly. I wish it was. I wish I was on here talking, about anything else, but not my own personal story over and over again, because it's hard on survivors to have to keep telling, and we do it to affect change. That's why we do it,
Absolutely. And, I think that the Repeal the Seal campaign did show just, I think, how many people have stories. It was just an outpouring of people sharing stories. And that was something, writing the book, anyone I would talk to, even just in passing, oh, what are you doing with yourself? I'm writing this book. And everyone had a story, not one person I spoke to. And it was strange. It was at parties, it was at a bus stop, you got talking to someone, and every single person, knew someone in their family or knew someone, or had themselves been affected. I really don't think there is a person in Ireland who hasn't been affected by this. And, it was something I wanted to show through the book. And, but also this fact that even though there's a commission of investigation that's been, ongoing since, for the last 5 years, and is due to finally issue their final report, but how much, access to records we will have after that is really questionable. The government has said, well, you will have personal access, but like you said, they've been using GDPR to deny third-party information, and deny people access to their own records. And it's something, so when the burial report, there was an interim report that came out last year, and I remember it coming out and reading it, and this is while I was still writing the book, and I recognized there was a paragraph of it, and it was an anonymized paragraph about a woman whose child had died in Bessborough, in the institution in Bessborough. And it gave these anonymized details about the fact that her son was actually buried in a famine graveyard in Cork. And the minute I read it, I recognized the story. And it was a story of a woman who I write about in the book, her Carmel's mother, who we call Bridget in the book. And I went with Carmel, her daughter, a few days later to this famine graveyard in Cork. And I write about it in the book, the experience of going there, and this overgrown field in the middle of nowhere, with not a single marker. And her family finally having at least the information that he was buried there. But the nuns had told her mother something completely different, had told her that he was buried on the grounds in Bessborough. And if it was not for that report, she would never have known. But they had made Freedom of Information requests, multiple ones before that, and yet had never been given those records. So, this final report coming out, finally, it was due to come out when I started writing this book. There will be anonymized details and narratives in that report, but it's really important that those families then get access to the original files that the Commission has gathered. And you said you might read actually an extract from the book, which is actually about Carmel's story and her brother William.
Such an moving account, because I have met Carmel as well. I apologise, I have a cat on my lap as well. So.
I saw his ears poking up.
Every single
we need a little bit of comic relief.
No, he's very elderly.
Fairly
so
welcome.
Ignore him. But anyway, apologies. Carmel Cantwell, who lives in Cork, used to help organise the annual commemoration at Bessborough. When I met her in Cork, she told me the story of her mother, whom she asked me to call Bridget. Bridget was born out of wedlock in a country home in Cashel. Her grandparents raised her in Tipperary along with 11 other siblings, who were actually her uncles and aunts. She left school at 13 and at 14 started work in a convent in Kilkenny, encouraged by the nuns to become a postulant. At 16, when she and other postulants were getting ready to be sent as missionaries to Australia, she needed her birth certificate to get a passport. The nuns told her that she would be not allowed to enter the Sisters of Charity because she was illegitimate. A year later, at 17, while working as a domestic in Tipperary, Bridget became pregnant out of wedlock herself. She fled to England, where she confessed to a priest. He arranged for the Crusade of Rescue in London to send her back to Ireland. Once she stepped through the door of Bessborough, her clothes were taken from her, along with her money and her savings book, and she was put to work. Her son William was born in 1960. After giving birth, Bridget became ill when the site of an injection in her buttock got infected. After 3 days, William too became sick. She remembered one nun accusing another of using an unsterilised needle. William was sent to St. Finbarr's Hospital. Carmel told me Bridget was told matter-of-factly, "Your baby died, and he's already buried." Bridget left Bessborough within a week, put on a boat back to England. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. For 36 years, she never told anyone about her son. "I was the first person," said Carmel. In 1995, Bridget went to Bessborough to ask the nuns for information. They sat her down and took out a file and told her William was buried in the nuns' cemetery. Sister Sarto then took Bridget down to the graveyard, not letting her come inside the gate, and tapped her foot against a patch of the grass. "Your baby's buried there," Sister Sarto said. Bridget asked if they could place a plaque, but the nun told her no, only a plain wooden cross. Carmel remembered her mother coming back to her own home in Cork that day and collapsing in sobs on the kitchen floor. It was then that Bridget told her the whole story. In 2014, Carmel told me she asked Thomas Quigley if he would ask the nuns to check the burial ledger for William. She believed the nuns must have some records of burials, and there were rumours of a ledger. Quigley came back to her after consulting with the nuns and told her to check with O'Connell funeral directors on Shandon Street or the city archives. Carmel found the record of William's death, which listed the causes as renal abscess and septicemia, but she could find no record of his burial. She and her mother put a small headstone over the spot Sister Sarto had indicated in the Bessborough cemetery. I always find that so moving, knowing Carmel and her story. I mean, it's just, and Sister Sarto loomed large in my story as well, and most people who ever came through Bessborough in terms of accessing information and everything else. It's a very moving piece from the book.
Thanks, and thank you for reading it, Noelle. And you know, so many people had that experience of trying to get information from the nuns who held the records for many years. And I even spoke to one man in the States, I think, who was asked to send money in order for them to do a trace.
But that's,
information.
It's just Sister Sarto using her foot to just point where a baby was buried. I mean, it just beggars belief in terms of, you know, that why most people in society, I mean, we love a good funeral in Ireland, you know what I mean? But those babies are denied, and their families and relatives are denied that respect, you know, that they're just dumped somewhere and nobody cares. It's a really damning indictment of how things are in 2020 Ireland, to know that those babies are still unaccounted for, or, you know, not given the respect that they deserve. It's very moving. Sorry, just sometimes.
No, it is. It's really important, I think, to remember this. It's something that, you know, that we know, but it just every time you sort of revisit it or realize it again, it is shocking.
And it is that assumption that, I mean, everyone that's born in Ireland, a birth is a huge event. We are expected to start our lives the day we were adopted. We must forget everything that went before, which goes against nature. It goes against everything. We were born. Our lives didn't begin the day we were adopted. It was a new chapter, whatever you want to call it. But our names, our date of birth, where we were born, all of those things are like, it's almost like they're deliberately being obliterated, which is, it's against our human rights. You know, it really is.
Yeah, people have a human right to identity and to that information. And I think, you know, something that you touched on before, I think is really important, is that it's quite a traumatizing experience to speak about these experiences. And I spoke to Bridget, I spoke to Carmel at length, and it wasn't easy for them to speak about this, particularly Bridget. This is an incredibly painful experience from her time, you know, being sent away by the Crusade of Rescue to Bessborough, going through time in that institution, made to work while she was pregnant, you know, sort of shamed during her time there. It was an incredibly painful experience. And then the loss of her son and the years of not knowing. And it can be, I think people sometimes think that telling those stories is a form of catharsis. And, you know, my experience speaking to survivors, it was, you know, I tried to obviously make it as comfortable for people, but it's an exhausting experience, and it can be a re-traumatizing experience. But, you know, the survivors I've spoken to say they do it because they think it's important that the truth is known, and also that this doesn't happen again, that we don't repeat these systems. As someone who's written about your own story, you know, how do we do better to create spaces for these stories to be heard, and to listen to survivors, because it's not I don't think it's an easy thing to speak about something that has been silenced for so long, and that is traumatic for people.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that today. I mean, I've chosen to share my story. It's not easy. It's still not easy. And it's emotionally very, very demanding. And I've shared it a lot over the years as an activist and as a performer, but I've chosen to do it. There are many people that can't. I think the perception is, and it was my experience when I met with the Commission of Investigation, that their function was to take your testimony, put it away, no one would ever read it. And they told me this on the day. And that somehow, there was a box of tissues on the table. It was tea and sympathy they were offering, really, which is not what we want. It just isn't. We want action. Otherwise, sharing our stories and putting ourselves through it, and it is putting yourself through something, is a waste of time. But there is that perception. And the power of testimonies to affect change is huge. We've seen that again and again, even in terms of repeal and marriage equality. And the power of the testimonies that were shared in the Dáil during the 10 days of horror for survivors, when their lives were being debated by people mostly who weren't affected by the issue and speaking from a point of privilege, who knew all their ancestry, probably dating back everywhere, and just took it for granted. The power of those testimonies, harrowing testimonies, far darker stories than I have. I'm one of the lucky ones. But the power of it, and watching, the TDs and the senators become so emotional on our behalf, you know what I mean? There's a great power in it, but we need to be listened in order to affect change. There's no point in setting up collaborative forums, commissions of investigation, if you are going to take those testimonies, put people through the difficulty of telling your story, and then do nothing. I think that is a huge problem. Create the spaces for us to tell our stories, document them, and then use them to make sure that this never happens again, and that people are given the answers that they deserve, and they're not dying without justice being affected in their lives, the families and relatives. I think that's the most important thing. And let us really listen to survivors and not make it just an exercise.
And do you think change is coming? Going forward now, what do you want to see done?
Well, basically that there is an independent organisation given our personal data, to take it away from TUSLA, to give it to experts who are up to speed on GDPR, who know what they're dealing with and are objective. The TUSLA are not objective. That needs to happen. I am hopeful, but I also worry, in another 5 years, will I be talking again? Will I be sharing my story again? Will I be putting on that play to try and get people talking and have conversations? I think we have come a distance since 2013. I feel it every time I do that play, and the different people that I meet, the young people that are coming to see the play, the sons and daughters of women born in mother and baby homes. They are angry and upset on our behalf, and they're the next generation. So, they're behind us now as well. And the level of support is across all age groups. Young people are waking up as well, going, this is wrong, So I'm hopeful, but I'm cautious, because the fighting is hard and it takes its toll on everybody. And people are dying, are passing away, and not seeing justice. And that's the hardest thing,
And I think, from writing the book as well, there are many stories of young people in the book, and people, again, my age and younger, who I think there's a new generation who are only starting to search for their information. And so this is not over, deny and wait till they die. These are young people.
Yeah. And they have voices
that were born in these institutions and are, have grown up in a very changed Ireland, and are demanding answers. And I think, as we've seen from Repeal the Seal, there's many, many, many people who know the truth and are, going to demand change. And like you said, and you said it in Bessborough the first time I heard you speak, is this is an equality issue.
It is, yeah. And choice as well, because the assumption is, when we ask for information, it's about contact and everyone has to stop us from making contact. It's like, no, it's about information. If we choose to make contact or we don't, that is our choice as adults. And the language around us as adoptees, even in the Dáil with Minister O'Gorman, every time he spoke about adoptees, he said, adopted children looking for information. Children. We're not children, we're adults, we're in charge of our own lives. But it's taking the choice away from birth families and from us to connect within a private family situation, a private family matter, because no matter how long we've been ripped apart, we're still family, we're still blood, we're still tribe, and it's denying our choice, and it's in denying our equality, our equal rights in Ireland to be recognised and not continually stamped with a stigma that has been inflicted on us by virtue of being, by an accident of birth, being born in a mother and baby home, being born outside of marriage. The word illegitimate was abolished, but it's hard not to feel that you still have that tag. You know, I'm 54 years of age now, and I still feel that level of stigma. It's, you know, when you talk to people in power, when you're trying to, you know, make change happen, and there's just that, ooh, we're othered in a way, you know, kind of, we're just this, we don't really fit, you know. And sometimes I think it's about class or something, you know what I mean, that there's the privilege, everyone knows their family, and there's a privilege around that, and then there's these other people here that don't quite fit, you know, in terms of class, and that in school, you know, industrial schools and laundries and everything else were associated with a lower class or something. You know, everybody got pregnant. It's nothing to do with class. You know what I mean? Women of all, from across all sections of society got pregnant. But there's an othering of us, which, and an infantilizing of us, which is detrimental to us owning our past and the country owning its past.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you so much for speaking about this and for sharing your story. It's a real honor to speak with you about it, and thank you for your reading as well. So Republic of Shame is, like I said, it's out. You can buy it at your local independent bookshop. You know, it's a good time to support our independence, or on kennys.ie as well. And do keep an eye out. Noelle is working on a new theatre play, which is being developed in November, thanks to support from the Abbey Theatre Engine Room. And it's about the experience of a woman whose baby was sold to the US in the 50s through a mother and baby institution. So definitely be keeping an eye out for that. And coming up at 12:30, the next event with the festival is with Doireann na Gríofa, who will be speaking about her extraordinary book, Ghost in the Throat, with RTE Arena's Paula Shields. So thank you again, Noelle, and thank you to Dingle Literary Festival. Take care, everyone, and thanks for joining us.